I think it's open, right, Lukan?
Yes, yes, we have 17 people, so people.
Okay, so people are seeing us now.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be right back. We have 17 people, so people are seeing us now.
We are getting echo from somewhere, I don't know from where. Gustavo? The echo.
There is an echo in Gustavo. You have an echo in your voice, in your sound.
Yes, Gustavo. The echo is in.
Might be myself. Okay, let's see
Yes.
now. Better.
Yes.
Yes, it's better now.
Now
Perfect.
it's okay. Gustavo, we have 3 minutes to go.
Okay, perfect. You can win an Olympic medal, Lukan, in that time.
Yeah. For 200 meters running.
Sorry?
For 200 meters running.
Oh, yes. Let me just check this. Hello? Just talk to see if it's working, my headphone.
Now it's okay. Do you hear?
Please talk anything.
Do you hear me? Everything is fine.
Let me just change the configurations.
Yeah, I'm trying to find this. Ah, here we go.
Now yes, perfect.
Okay.
Just a moment. What happened to my presentation? Holy moly. So where did it go?
Let's give Lukan 3 or 4 minutes for after the time, so people who are trying to connect, we don't lose our start with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just about to start. What?
I have no idea. It came in that box from, yes, it came from.
All right, but I got to go back on now.
Where's the box? Did you run out?
Okay, in 3 minutes we start. Perfect. Okay, Lukan, whenever you want.
So, just a second. I'm trying to broadcast this also. Okay, we can start.
Let's go. It's up to you, our video. Then I start giving the welcome to everyone, please.
Just a second.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you everyone for being with us today. I'd like to welcome first our panelists, starting with California, our friend Samuel Masket. Good morning, how are you?
Yes, fine. It's a beautiful day here, and I hope it is that way all around the world. Welcome to everybody.
Thanks for being with us. From Brazil, our friend Neto Rosatelli. Bom dia, Brazil. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. How are you?
Bom dia, Gustavo. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Neto. From Italy, buonasera, Italia. How are you, my friend Francesco Boscia?
Very well, thank you. Ciao a tutti quelli che ascoltano dall'Italia.
Okay, this one will be more tricky for me. Masal Khair, ya Misr. Welcome, Egypt. How are you?
How are you, Gustavo? Masa al-Nur.
Thank you for being with us. And last but not least, my co-organizer in this webinar, my friend Lukan Mishev BUL, Bulgaria. How are you?
Dobar den, Brasilia. Dobar den, all the world. I'm fine, thanks. Thank you for participating in our webinar, and I'm looking for a great event now.
Thank you so much. So we don't want to lose the time of our attendees. We're going to start with my friend from Ribeirão Preto, Brazil, Neto Rosatelli. Will give us the basics of IOL complications and how you have to think when you are going to work with them. Neto, the screen is totally yours, please.
I'll start sharing my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Neto Rosatelli from Brazil, and I'll open this meeting talking about planning strategies in cases of dislocated IOLs.
Neto, something happened with the sound. The sound is low.
Please elevate your sound.
Demands judicious and meticulous work, as we will see.
What happened?
Something.
I'm sorry, Lukan, is it without sound?
Yes, the sound is low now. Something happened with the sound.
Oh,
The sound of your also voice. Your voice also is low. Not only the presentation. Your voice also become low.
okay, I'll try again, sorry.
Don't worry.
Hello, everyone. I am Neto Rosatelli from Brazil, and I'll open this meeting.
Now it's okay.
Now it's good. Just share the screen and go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
no screenshot.
Oh, sorry.
Share screen down there. Then you choose the PowerPoint or Keynote. I don't know what you're having, or the video.
Yes, it's in the...
So while we start, please let me know, people who are our attendees, please write down which country are you coming from. I want to know how international we are. Now, yes. Okay, perfect, Neto.
Okay, sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Hello, everyone. I am Neto Rosatelli from Brazil, and I will open this meeting talking about planning strategies in cases of dislocated IOLs and secondary IOL implantation. From an IOL nightmare to vision restored demands judicious and meticulous work, as we will see. Dealing with dislocated IOLs or facing a secondary IOL implantation is not an ordinary task. These two situations present many challenges. Necessary information about pre-existing conditions may be lacking. Corneal or capsular opacity issues and iris adherences may hamper adequate examination. Anterior segment structure status are often less than ideal for correction, requiring technically difficult procedures which are not routinely done, especially by inexperienced surgeons. If I were to resume this whole presentation with one phrase, I would say, be prepared. To be prepared, it is imperative to initiate a thinking process to be able to plan the best strategy to address the problem. Situational awareness should be made in order to be able to choose the best course of action. The surgeon can then prepare him or herself with material and technical knowledge to approach the case. During surgery, it is often necessary to reassess the situation and eventually change plans as new information is achieved. Undoubtedly, the most important thing to assess is presence and quality of capsular support. Having capsular support for the IOL greatly facilitates things, allowing simpler, less invasive, and more predictable techniques to be used. Ability to use the capsular bag for IOL support depends on many factors. How are the zonules? Is there a posterior capsular rent or YAG laser capsulotomy? Anterior and posterior capsule fusion and presence of cortex remnants and Sommerring ring presents a challenge to in-the-bag IOL implantation. Anterior capsular axis status is most important to be determined, as it can play a major role not only by providing support, but also by allowing optic capture with all its advantages. A phimotic capsular bag is a major challenge, often requiring complete bag removal and employment of IOL fixation techniques. Iris condition assessment will dictate not only necessary surgical steps to be taken, such as releasing synechiae and incision iris trapping, and even pupilloplasty, but also prevent use of IOL iris fixation techniques, for example. Anterior chamber vitreous presence is a frequent occurrence, requiring adequate management and decision-making process often done as things progress. Some situations may require retina specialist assistance if the surgeon is not qualified, such as rescuing an IOL or an IOL bag complex from the vitreous, for example. With dislocated IOLs, the question to be asked is, why did it dislocate? This information is key in order to decide what to do, as it often determines or limits the options to correct the problem. The ideal solution is to be able to use the same IOL, better yet in an in-the-bag situation or at least with capsular support. Be wary of repositioning an IOL and leaving it without knowing why it dislocated in the first place. To be able to maintain the existing IOL, the following question arises. Is this IOL still good to be used? Are the haptics in order? Was the previous refractive outcome adequate? If in-the-bag implantation is not feasible, is it compatible with the intended fixation technique? If the existing IOL will not be maintained, the surgeon must be comfortable with the explantation techniques to be used and have the required surgical instruments available. Using optic capture is desirable for many reasons, as it provides IOL centration and long-term stability, and also acts as a barrier, stabilizing a two-chambered eye. That is why achieving a perfectly centered and adequately sized capsular axis when doing cataract surgery is important, as it represents a kind of insurance should IOL dislocation or IOL exchange indication occur in the future. Aspheric and multifocal IOLs absolutely need adequate positioning for good performance. Alternatives should be prepared in case these situations cannot be achieved. Also, remember that the lens's effective position affects IOL power calculations. If the previous surgery is recent, some aspects must be considered, such as incision placement, use of the same incisions, feasibility to release an IOL from its attachments, etc. As some of these questions will be answered only during surgery, initial planning is subjected to change. Some aspects relative to patient's characteristics may play a role in deciding which technique to use. Surgeons are more comfortable using IOL iris fixation techniques in older patients than in young ones, for example. Anticoagulant use may prevent sclerofixation techniques, which are more prone to bleeding. Other ocular or systemic conditions may also interfere. Material and instruments availability play an important role in technique choice. Be sure to have everything necessary to perform the chosen procedure. Micro-instrumentation and special hooks are a great asset in managing these cases. A multitude of fixation techniques exists. These techniques present different levels of difficulty. Some require special material or IOLs. Their indication and applicability vary depending on many aspects of the case and even surgeon preference or experience. Cost issues may be important. It is advisable that the surgeon achieves experience on more than one to be able to deal with IOL nightmares. the surgeon should always consider an alternate plan and have a spare IOL if necessary, should the main plan happens not to be feasible. We do have a Swiss Army knife in our armamentarium, the foldable 3-piece IOL. It is the best choice in doubtful or unforeseen situations because it is compatible with most IOL fixation techniques. The surgeon should always have a foldable 3-piece IOL inventory available at all times. Please visit my YouTube channels, lots of videos on many surgical techniques. Search my name on YouTube and you'll find them. Thank you for your attention.
Very good, Neto. Very good. Excellent. So, Mohamed, what do you want to talk about that? I love the instruments that Neto showed there. And Neto, where did you buy them? Please talk a little bit about them.
Oh, many are from Realmax, USA, but some from Duckworth and Kent. And I really use many providers. But I think good instrumentation is one of the best investments the ophthalmologic surgeon does, because not only it deeply influences the quality of your work, but quality instruments are much cheaper in the long run, because cheaper ones last too little.
Okay. Mohamed, your opinion, please.
Are ready for my presentation, or what you are asking about?
No, I want. What do you think about Neto has shown? Do you have any opinion, or would you like to add something?
For me, I use IOL exchanging now. I have no comment now.
Okay, Professor Masket.
Well, I think it was a really excellent summary of what you have to go through in considering this, and also realize that we have almost a pandemic, if you will, of late dislocation of IOLs. So we really need to have a whole series of tricks, so to speak, in our bag on how to do this. One comment didn't come up, though, and that is in the decision-making whether to retain or to remove and replace a lens, it's very important to know how well that lens functioned for the patient over the long run. Did the patient have long-standing myopic error that they didn't like, and now the lens is loose? So it's an opportunity to fix the optical problem. On the other hand, if the lens is a lens that cannot be retained because let's say it's a plate haptic and we don't have the ability to fixate it, although we can, but depending upon the surgeon's experience and comfort. So please make an assessment whether or not that lens is worth salvaging based upon how well it functioned for the patient. And that helps along that decision tree whether to remove or replace an IOL.
Excellent. Francesco, any comments?
I would follow on what Dr. Masket said. I very much believe that we have to gauge the patient needs, patient age, status of the endothelium before choosing whether using the same IOL or a better one. And my point, but my presentation will show it in further details, is that I'd better provide the best optical option for the patient, and in most of the cases is providing a new IOL, well positioned, well centered, not tilted, with the proper refractive correction.
Very good. And just to add a comment on what Professor Masket said about the pandemic of IOL problems, we have to remember that cataract surgery is the most performed surgery in the world. So it's about epidemiology, okay?
and further, most of the cataract surgeons never stop. They want to go till the very end, implanting a IOL even with the already sunken IOL. So implanting a double IOL in the same eye. Sometimes also that occurred.
We all have seen that. Yeah, it's perfect. Very good. So, my friend Tawfik, you are the owner of the screen. Please go ahead. And welcome for being with us.
It's already on screen now?
Yes.
My presentation is about Aphakic iris glow IOL. I starting my video presentation now. This is my usual technique of IOL implantation in aphakia. This is a case of traumatic dropped crystalline lens. After finishing removing of the lens by fragmatome, I got my side port incisions in 3 and 8 9 o'clock, and opening the main incision about 4 to 5 milli. Before of opening the main incision, I put the constricting the pupil, and now opening the main incision about 3 to 4 milli, or 4 millimeter, 4 milli. This is the space is enough to entering the artisan, Aphakic artisan. There's a special note here that you need to put the volt of this IOL to the posterior, like flipping this IOL. This is a special force that holding this IOL from the optics, entering from the side port to clipping the iris by this blunt instrument. If you are not satisfied by this clipping, you can re-clip again and make sure that your clip is sufficient to grasping this IOL. Don't remove your hand. Keep shifting your right hand and left hand, and keep holding the IOL. Put the other haptic behind the iris, and clip the other haptic from the other side port. We need to do just 1 stitch or 2 stitch. That's enough, and you can remove it after 3 to 4 weeks. I usually put my artisan Aphakic IOL is in retropupillary because we have an around the pupil and free AC with no fear. This is a case of a spherophakia. The anterior segment surgeons here make it like a lensectomy, and I have no choice for a secondary implantation. For me is the same IOL, the same technique, clipping the left optics and the right optics, and as you see we have a very centered posterior IOL. This is also a traumatic loss of the lens, but in this case we have a traumatic mydriasis, and I didn't clarify to do iridoplasty on table, but I putting the IOL. I will show you that this is, you can clip also this IOL in a dilated pupil. You have no problem. The same technique, but in this cases I used not a blunt instrument to clipping the haptics. I use a Sansky to clip the haptic. Again, flip the IOL, entering with your Sansky, and clip the right haptic, as you shown here, and left haptic. And after we finish, you can see that the IOL is very stable by clipping, as you see here. It's perfect centered. In this case, with the iris glaucoma, after making the iridoplasty for this case, by the way, the patient have an RD and iris glaucoma, so after finishing the surgery for the vitrectomy, I do the iridoplasty, keeping the lower iridectomy for silicone oil. This is my usual technique for iridoplasty, and after I finish the suturing the iris. This is my regular way. I use extracting the loop here. Make a 4 loops. 3 to 4 loops. As you see, after cutting the knot here by the scissor, I cut the knot here and here. You can introduce your artisan Aphakic by the same way. I starting here from the left haptic. No matter you are starting from left or right, according you are grasping your optics from by your right hand and your left hand is free. You have some difficulty to enter by this sense piece, so I shifting using the blunt instrument. You don't need to use this sharp instrument to clipping the haptic. I shift all my cases now to clipping by blunt instrument. Don't need to use this sharp instrument like Sansky. As you see, we have a difficulty to entering the side port and clipping also the right haptic here. With very good centration and the clipping. And by this sharp instrument, you can see that the iris is penetrating and the haptic is go through anterior to the iris. So again, I stopped using this sharp Sansky and I usually starting clipping by blunt instrument. And I remember this is my first case of Yamane. I starting this technique 1 year ago because I am very confident by the iris group, but I need to starting using this technique for secondary IOL implantation in Aphakic cases. By the way, this is my first case. I introduced my 27 gauge cannula in a perfect way, I think, and starting using the forceps to engaging the haptic with this cannula. But unfortunately, I found that the haptic didn't go through the cannula, and I failed to engage this haptic through this cannula. I didn't know this is a 27 gauge and it's not fit. Maybe I need 30 gauge or 28 gauge. But actually, I didn't have in that time the only syringe that I was having in that time. So I failed to engage the haptic in the syringe. And I decided to go back to my favorite technique, remove the 3-piece IOL, and decide to go back to my favorite IOL, remove the 3-piece. And again, introduce my favorite Aphakic. This is the artisan again, with the usual technique, just go through in a longitudinal approach to enter in a small incision about 4 milli. Don't enter in a horizontal approach because you need large incision. Clipping holding the IOL, introduce one haptic behind the iris, and keep the others over the iris. In this blunt instrument, you don't fear for piercing the iris, as you see. You don't fear piercing the iris. Whatever you're pushing in the iris, I think you will not cutting the iris. In this case, I clipping, but I am not confident with clipping. Don't go away until you are confident with your clipping. As you see, this is a good clipping here. Put the left haptic behind the iris and clipping the other haptic on the left side. By using this blunt, you don't fear for piercing the iris or cutting it. So you have a both good clipping in right and left. And we finish the case. By the way, I'm now using the Yamane technique, but this was my first case using the Yamane technique, and I failed. This is my first, the only case I found it for dropped very size aphakia in a children. The first surgeon for this IOL is putting in retropupillary. So my advice here, if you're putting this artisan aphakia in children, I think you need to put it in the EC because the children have a much more incidence of trauma and this IOL may be dropped. But if in this case, the IOL is dropped and I go through and catching this IOL, and this is the same IOL, I didn't remove it and just put it in the EC. But in the EC, we didn't need to flip the IOL, make the vault anteriorly, And this is the clue here for this IOL. If you put it in the retropupillary, you need to flip it, make the vault posterior. And if you put it in the EC, you need to put it in vault anterior. I just keep it in the EC, holding the one haptic, and the other haptics is go through the putting in the EC. Make it in horizontal axis and clip it. If you are clipping from the anterior, I think we need a sharp instrument like a Sansky, because we need to grasp the iris. And this technique, you just go behind the iris and grasp a tissue from the iris and go anterior to the iris. And thank you, Dr. Gustavo. This is my presentation and my way to doing Aphakic for secondary IOL.
Very good, Mohamed. Very good. We have a question from our attendees. One of them want to know if you stop or diminish the infusion line while you are clipping the IOL, or you keep it open, regular, same height. How do you deal with it?
If you in this IOL, you have a 4 millimeter incision minimum, and when you enter the EC, you lose the tension. So you need to keep the infusion on. If you are using the EC maintainer, and also if you are using the sclerotomy.
Very good. I don't have any experience with the artisan. I want to listen from the other panelists. For here, I'm inviting also, I think he's your friend, Mohamed, Ahmed from Egypt.
My friend,
Welcome, Ahmed. I want to listen from you guys. What's your experience with the artisan IOL? Because I don't know nothing about it almost.
Well, good evening, Gustavo, and good evening to all of the distinguished speakers here. Yeah, so I have some experience in this type of lens. I use it actually where I don't use it in children, of course, but whenever I have the chance of getting a big incision, so like an explanting a PMME lens or something, I have the opportunity to put this type of lens because it's a big lens and you will have to open the cornea. But recently I switched to changing my incision to going to a scleral tunnel incision, 2 millimeters away from the limbus, constructing your scleral tunnel in order to get inside the anterior chamber and inclavate the lens in this way. Will help to maintain your post-operative astigmatism, since you will be able to close this scleral tunnel with temporary sutures that will later on be absorbed and will not be affecting your astigmatism on the long run. Another option here, I think, yes, in order to minimize your astigmatism, or if you're trying to neutralize corneal astigmatism in the vertical meridian, I would use a 5.5 millimeter keratome incision to introduce this lens, and this well-constructed lamellar corneal incision could be left without any sutures, and it could neutralize some sort of astigmatism in the vertical meridian if you're going to improve the astigmatic profile of this patient.
Very good, Ahmed.
I have to get on the point that we have to concentrate on the power of the lens. We have to change the power of the lens actually and adjust our power to the A constant of 117 rather than 115 when you're putting the lens in the retropupillary position.
Okay, Ahmed, I will ask you to write that in our chat because it's a lot of info. There's numerical things you have given us. So please type it because other attendees would love to have it as well. Somebody else wants to talk? Professor Masket?
Yeah, in the United States, the artisan lens is still investigational. Our practice is one of the study sites for it, and hopefully we will have it for wide use in the near term. We are limited, however, to anteropupillary fixation. We cannot do it retropupillary. But I fully agree with the concept that this should be done through a scleral incision. Once you go above 3.5 millimeters in the cornea, you then get into astigmatic issues and the question then about suture removal, particularly up at 5 or 6 millimeters. I think I would probably choose to avoid that. But what the presentation showed us was that you really need to have all 14 clubs in your bag, to use the metaphor of golf. You need, that's a great tool that we should have. course, here in the States. But if you don't have that tool or you don't have enough iris to fixate it, then you need to consider ways to fixate a variety of lenses to the sclera. In the demonstration of the failed Yamane technique, one of the things that we always do is we like to fit that haptic into the needle that we're going to use before we enter the eye. And this way we'll know for sure that we have a good fit. So both needles and both haptics should be tested before going into the eye. And you won't get into what I call a world of hurt, where you've got the lens in the eye, you've got the needle in the eye, but they just
don't. The next case, this is what I learned in the next case. This was my first case of Hüning.
Yeah, life teaches us a lot. And, you know, we always learn by the difficult, not by the easy. You'll never remember the thousands of easy cases you do, but you will learn from every case we do that's difficult. So there's a specific needle for that. It's a wide bore 30 gauge needle from TSK, and that's the one that most people are using today. Yeah, I think that's the comments I would make. But I'm surprised that you're comfortable with a corneal incision that size. And it's always a question of how do you remove the sutures at what time, and you have to time it so that the astigmatism, because you can induce easily 3 or 4 diopters with those sutures. And then, yeah.
In the matter of astigmatism, I didn't find any problem. I just have a much more 2 or 3 astigmatism. After 3 weeks, I removed the suturing and came back to a neutral. But by the way, what's the calling, Ahmed, about the scleral tunnel to introduce this IOL, I think it make us better for astigmatic nutrition, astigmatic affecting.
Yeah, we've had, you know, that device is actually was one of the first Aphakic IOLs that we had, the artisan type. It's called Verisize. It was marketed in the States. By them it was AMO. So I had experience with that years ago, and we would almost invariably do it through a superior scleral tunnel, a frown shape, and then we didn't really have significant cylinder issues, and the incisions were always stable. So that would be my preference, even in the Aphakic.
Okay, Lukan, you wanted to say something, please?
Yeah, I want to ask about the iris claw. I know that there is a vault, but still I saw no peripheral iridectomy done. And have you ever experienced UGH syndrome, uveitis glaucoma hyphema syndrome, with posteriorly fixated iris claw lens?
By the way, Dr. Lukan, I have using this IOL 5 years ago now, and I didn't find any single cases of UGH syndrome until now. Mm-hmm. All cases I put it in retropupillary. I didn't find any problem. And by the way, now I didn't do any iridotomy because I didn't find any rule for this iridotomy, because the vault is everted and there is a space between the iris and the IOL to go like a fluid from posterior to anterior chamber.
There is a question in YouTube which I think we will answer at the end of the session. It's for the panelist. What type of fixation of IOL we think is more physiological, sclerally fixated one or iris fixated one, because the iris is a really dynamic tissue. Question from the Moon Wei Lee.
Lukan, let's leave that one for the end, because this is the most polemic discussion in the world, maybe, okay? Yeah. The last question before we go forward is from Dr. Ketan Yathar, sorry for the pronunciation. Tips for avoiding a cat's eye pupil when you use that technique?
You need to adjust, first of all, the side of your clipping. I usually put it in 3 and 9 o'clock, and the distance of the clipping from the pupil center. Now you avoid this catch eye gloom. By the way, if you have also a small degree of catch IOL, after surgery, 2 to 3 days, when the pupil regain constricted, it will disappear if it's a small degree.
Thank you so much. And another thing I would like to point is that when you felt uncomfortable with the Yamane, you change for the technique where with which you felt more comfortable. That was a comment from Dr. Andre Berger, and it's totally perfect, okay? Instead of trying and damaging the eye, please stop and go back to what you know to do, okay? Guys, let's go forward. Dr. Francesco Boscia, per favore.
Per favore.
So here I am. Can you see the slides?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I'll be talking about this relatively new IOL, the Carlevale lens, which was devised by a good friend of mine, Carlo Carlevale, in Italy a few years ago. So we heard already that after a capsular rupture or in lack of good capsular support, there are several options. Hopefully, if there is a good anterior capsular support, we can implant a three-piece IOL within the sulcus. In US, I understand most of the surgeons still prefer implant, at least posterior chamber, posterior segment surgeon, vitrectomy surgeon, prefer to implant into the anterior chamber the IOL with the entering possible risk of a chronic CME, tomivial irritation, or even more worrisome corneal decompensation. We also heard about the iris fixation, which requires an intact iris, but can cause pupil distortion and iris chafing. This is one of such cases. This was a traumatic cataract with a broad iridectomy, and of course, before placement of the very size, the artisan IOL, I had to close the iridectomy in order to provide a good support for the IOL. Of course, you might ask why, in this case, did I choose this IOL? I prefer the very size for cases such as this, where there was a large section and the patient age was advanced. We can also suture the IOL both to the iris, but again, there is a risk of corneal decompensation, pupil distortion, and iris chafing atrophy, or to the sclera. And in these cases, I think, at least in my hands, apart from the, let's say, relatively difficult surgical procedure, there is a strong risk of tilting and for sure the risk of suture breakage or degradation with time, especially for tenor proline. This is a case where I had to do a corneal graft and placing an aniridia PMMA IOL utilizing 8O Gore-Tex. But again, as you can see, this is, at least in my hands, reserved for more advanced type of surgery and for this kind of IOL. In 2007, Scariot and Aggarwal introduced the idea of a sutureless scleral fixated IOL, and more recently, Yamane completed or better professionalized the techniques. This, of course, had a reduced risk of postoperative astigmatism, but still remains difficult, and there are problems with centration of this IOL and its long-term stability. This is a case where a traumatic cataract had been removed several years in advance, and I tried the Yamane, better, this sutureless scleral fixated technique. This was really perhaps Scariot technique. Again, there are difficulties, you can see, in loading the haptics within the needle and with the risk of distortion, or even more worse from the breakage of the haptic itself. That's why the advent of this single-piece sutureless scleral fixation IOL sounds attractive to me. It's foldable, it's one-piece hydrophilic acrylic with a novel design of flexible scleral plugs at the end of two, again, flexible haptics meant to be anchored in the sclera sutureless. The characteristic of this IOL are the large optic diameter, 6.5, so it's very easy to keep it well centered, with a large diameter, 13.2 millimeter, and an haptic angulation of 10 degrees. Again, is an hydrophilic acrylic with 25% of water. It's provided in a wide range of power, from -5 to +35 with steps of half diopter, and injected via a 2.2 or 2.7 section, and is manufactured by Soleco, which also provides a toric model of this lens. And you can see, due to the low possibility of tilting and the low astigmatism, this sounds also very attractive. This is the surgical technique where I prepare. First, I prepare the scleral pocket. I prefer doing it before placing the trocast in order to have a firm bulb. I, of course, mark the 0 and 180 meridian, creates the scleral pockets, trying to keep them opposite one to the other. Then if the pupil is small, I prefer to place iris hook or whatever is needed. In this case, I removed the IOL. This was a very young patient. This is also the reason why I didn't use the three-piece IOL, which I cut and removed via 2.5 millimeter section. This is the Carlevale IOL, which I loaded on the injector. I did a 2.5 section, then I created a sclerotomy of 25 gauge, injected the IOL. You might notice the transparent plug, which I removed utilizing a 25 gauge crocodile visual forceps. This is again the second anchor plug. In these cases, initially I sutured the scleral pockets. Now I'm not suturing them anymore. This is one of my first cases where I implanted this IOL in a patient who had a complicated cataract extraction. As you can see, in this case, the pupil was very small, and the plug looked somehow distorted. I couldn't feel comfortable. That's why I realized what I should have done at the very beginning, that is dilating the pupil, because it confirms one of the theoretical, the suggestion Neto gave us initially. Most of the cases, we don't know what has been done during the first surgery. What I found, apart from the small pupil, were these capsular remnants which were entangled with the haptics of the IOL. I tried again to maneuver the plugs, but then I realized I had to get rid of the capsular remnants. I did it so just by cutting the capsular remnants. So you can see how the haptic will unfold slowly and gently, keeping and having the IOL repositioned in the perfect fashion. Then I, of course, removed the iris hooks, and I did what I always do when I implant this IOL. I do an iridectomy because I did experience, well, not myself, one of my patients, pupil block even with the artisan IOL. So I always do an iridectomy. And this is the end of the cases, but this was very instructive because, again, teaches us that we need, in order to implant this IOL, large pupil and rid of capsular remnants. So the refractive outcomes, in all cases there was an improved, of course, uncorrected and best corrected visual acuity. The prediction error, which are found reported in the literature by a recent paper by Barca et al., was minus 0.24, which was comparable to all those of the other sutureless fixation, with a very low astigmatism. And this is due to the small corneal incision and to the lack of suture. Again, the only suture I placed initially were those at the scleral pocket at the conjunctiva, which I now avoid. In this paper by Barca et al., they also looked at the tilting, and their evaluation was carried out with the spectral domain anterior segment OCT. And as you can see, the mean tilt found was 2 degrees, lower than that reported by Yamane and Agarwal. And the lowest degree was on the horizontal axis, where, of course, the IOL was fixed by the scleral plugs. So what are the crucial steps? What is the crucial step of this surgery, which has a very smooth learning curve? The externalization of the leading plug utilizing the vitreous forceps while the IOL is injected. This is really crucial. And this is somehow challenging because the intraoperative visualization during injection is impaired due to the transparency of the plugs, which are in the same acrylic material as the remaining of the lens, and also by some degree of distortion of the cornea. A question was raised earlier on the level of pressure I want while I'm doing this surgery. I utilizing a pressure of about 12-14 millimeters of mercury. I use the Constellation equipment, and I usually remove the IOP control in order to keep this as the pressure, working pressure during this surgery, because I don't want a too soft eye. Manipulating the plug is somehow forgiving because can be stressed, can be pulled within a certain limit, because in my experience, in one case, I broke one of the extremity of the anchor plug. It provides an optimal position as centration. During a sutureless fixation, utilizing a standard TPPC IOL, precise and symmetrical parallel scleral tunnel are mandatory in order to achieve a correct position. And most of the cases you have to manipulate the optics and there is a risk of damage. This at least occurs in my hands. With the Carlevale IOL, the symmetrical position of the sclerotomy is sufficient in order to center at the best the IOL optic, regardless of the eye size. This is due to the shape and soft material of the IOL, which allows stretching of the connection mesh between the plugs and the optics without causing IOL optic decentration. And again, the IOL optic is quite large, it's 6.5 millimeter. Possible complication. Again, there is a risk of reverse papillary block. In the paper by Barca et al., it was in the range of 6%, and it was resolved with the YAG iridotomy. I suggest an intraoperative peripheral iridectomy, either with the vitrector or with scissors, as I did in the cases I showed. The hydrophilic IOL is a good UL biocompatibility. There is no evidence of postoperative inflammation in my series, nor in Barker et al. Series. There was a minimal postoperative hypotony. This is due to the complete filling of the 25-gauge sclerotomy by the plug. Still, there might be some leakage. That's why when I'm using it together with the vitrectomy, I carry out a partial fluid-air exchange in order to exploit the superficial tension of the air to avoid the further leakage of the BSS. Again, postplanar vitrectomy might be recommended because, of course, it gives you more comfort. We have been talking about comfort zone. Well, of course, having all the access to the posterior segment gives you that comfort. But what I think is really needed is the BSS infusion, again, to keep the eye firm during the maneuver. So, in conclusion, I think this is really a big advancement. It's very easy to deliver, it's resistant to surgical maneuvers. It provides, and this is the major asset, what really makes me feel this is the best way to correct the aphakia in the setting of accent cell capsular support, because it gives you an optimal centration with little intraoperative manipulation, with very little tilting. Gives you a predictable refractive outcome, is stable, is provided in a wide diopter range and with toric possibility. And again, is successful also to anterior segment surgeon, provided an anterior infusion cannula is placed. What should be improved? Well, I think that the scleral plugs visibility is something needs to be improved, because especially at the very beginning, the visibility might be impaired due to its transparency. Thank you for your attention.
Very good, very good.
Very good.
Mute here. So we have one question from Francesco Doria. He wants to know, how do you calculate the IOL power for a Carlevale lens?
Well, the constant is provided on the technical leaflet, and is inserted into any IOL master or IOL again calculator.
Okay, but how do you calculate more or less the position, the same way you would calculate a regular IOL?
Yes, yes. Perhaps what I didn't say, my sclerotomies were done 1.5 millimeter from limbus, but apart from that, there is really no other assumption, no other calcul you have to do.
Okay. Another thing, you have said that you have an anchor which was broken. What did you do? Or what do you do when it breaks?
It was broken at the very end, so it still was very stable, because the remaining part assured the stability of the IOL. But again, as you can see, there are, apart from the plugs, which of course are pivotal in keeping the IOL in place, there were also very large, even if soft, haptics, which stay and within the ciliary sulcus. So even if I had broken completely, provided one of the sides of the anchor was in place, I would have stayed relatively safe. You could also see an OCT image I showed during the presentation of the plug, and once the sclera is sealed and one of the extremities of the plug is within the pocket, nothing will happen.
Perfect. Anyone else has experience with Carlevale IOL? I just have in wet lab. So here in Brazil, we still don't have it, as far as I know. If we have, please, one of the attendees correct me. Lukan, I know you know something about it. Go ahead.
Yes, I had my first Carlevale lens two days ago, and I agree that the learning curve is actually really steep. I was surprised how strong are the anchors, so it's not easy to be teared from the lens. And the other thing that I note was that when you do your flaps and you anchor the lens, it actually instantaneously fit on the sulcus without any need of additional movement. The one thing I wanted to ask is what blade you use for making the scleral incision? Do you use a 25 gauge trocar or something else? Because my concern is if I use a needle or something which is more or less not so sharp, I can even create a ciliary detachment.
You're right. So I started using a needle, a 25 gauge needle. But then again, all the maneuvers in retrieving the plug were somehow, I wouldn't say difficult, but I felt unsafe. So what I'm doing now is just a small slit with the even a trocar blade, a small slit vertical, possibly, in order that when I retrieve the plug, which has an horizontally placed again plug, once retrieved, it unfolds and stays in place. So I'm using, I'm going more or less on basis of experience, but I don't go with the full trocar within the eye, just with the tip of it, just in order to make a perpendicular slit, perpendicular to the limbus.
I have a question to Sam Masket. I observed his handling of choroidal detachment during phaco. So keeping the choroidal detachment open or not. Do you think that Carlevale lens can provide us with way of closing such choroidal clefts?
Yeah, it's not a choroidal, it's actually a ciliary body detached from a cyclodialysis cleft. We will never get experience with this lens in the United States, unfortunately. So I don't know, but in the concept of closing a cleft, what we call ab interno, in some situations we can use a CTR or a segment, a CTS, or you can use sutures. But I like the idea of closing it from the inside rather than these maneuvers to try and close it from the outside. So this lens actually does bring, it does bring the ciliary body up against the sclera. It's not supposed to detach it. So it would probably work and be just a simple way to approach it. While I have the microphone, though, there's a concern that we have developed for hydrophilic lenses in post-vitrectomy eyes. Now, these eyes tend to be complex, and the long-term history of these eyes will never be known until it's played out. And should they need any other surgery that requires the use of air or gas, such as endothelial keratoplasty or another vitrectomy procedure where gas is used, there's a certain percentage of hydrophilic IOLs that undergo calcific degeneration. We've had that experience with the AO60 lens. That was a popular lens for us to use without capsule support because the 4 holes allowed us to suture fixate it to the sclera. It's a simple and popular method. Problem, though, however, is that if those eyes need surgery again with gas, unfortunately, those lenses can turn opaque. And then you've got a complex situation to remove in an already significantly compromised eye. So I'm just curious. I mean, I don't know how this lens has been in use in Europe, and I don't know if anyone has experienced this, but I'd love to hear some comments on it from Francesco or anybody else who has experience with it.
So let me first answer your question. Of course, when I decide to implant the IOL, I usually have a good feeling that the patient wouldn't, at least at the best of my assumption, need further surgery. Otherwise, I wouldn't implant till the time I'm very safe. So I have no experience so far with any reduce in patient utilizing this IOL. There is a theoretical risk, as you said, but again, I also had to remove one of these IOL, and it's very easy at the end of the day, because pulling with one of the vitreal forceps, the IOL, and cutting with the other end removes it very easily from the eye in cases of calcification. So it's reversible, even if it's very stable. One of the questions which arose earlier on was the availability of this IOL. I understand, because today I had a word with Renzo Calabresi by Soleco about the diffusion of this IOL. I understand that there are, it's quite well known in Eastern Europe, in Southern Europe, of course. It will be, and it's sold in some of the South American countries. As far as the US, of course, there is the FDA, and everything becomes more difficult over there. But they would love to undergo even that trial.
Okay, Neto, you want to make a question for Francesco, just because we have to keep up with the schedule. Answering to your question, Professor Masket, here at the public system, we perform a lot of combined surgeries, I mean vitrectomy and cataract, and the only IOL which we have access to is hydrophilic. So far, and thanks God, I didn't have any problem with that, and I hope I don't have in the future. And I can pass you the name later. It's from a Brazilian company, but that's my experience with that. Neto, please.
Yes. Francesco, do you think it would be possible to make the scleral pockets like a tunnel or like a Hoffman pocket with the opening placed posteriorly, avoiding the need to suture and perhaps with a smaller conjunctival opening?
Well, I think that also possibility would be to create just a buttonhole in the conjunctiva, and as you suggested, just create an horizontal out thickness cut with just the sclerotomy, and to accommodate the plug within the parallel, the sulcus, the scleral sulcus parallel to the limbus. So I think this is my next idea, instead of creating the pockets. I mean, it's a very easy maneuver anyway, because it takes more or less 3 to 4 minutes, but still could be avoided, yes.
Okay.
I like the Neto. I think it will be very trick to avoid the sclera flap, because you just need to plug, embed it in the sclera.
Lukan, very quick, last question, and then we'll have Professor Masket.
It will be short comment about the calcification of the AO lens. It's actually a problem only of this lens, because in our practice, our regular lens is also hydrophilics from Boscia lamp, and I do a lot of combined vitrectomies, and up to now I haven't found any calcification issues, but we know about the AO, probably something with the material of the AO that calcifies.
For sure. For sure. Okay, Dr. Samuel Masket from California, thanks for joining us as well. The screen is yours.
Okay. I hope you can all see what we have. Yes. And again, thank you for inviting me, and welcome to all of our colleagues and friends around the world. As we heard earlier, there's a whole sequence where we start and where we finish. And along the road, at some point, if we're going to reposition or remove an IOL, we have to stabilize it. And this can become a problem. I have no relevant disclosures in this presentation. This can become a problem, particularly in the post-vitrectomy eye. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're having this pandemic of late malposition IOLs from capsule contraction. Basically, it has to do with the anterior subcapsular LECs undergoing fibrometaplasia and capsule contraction and progressive zonulitis. And the most common condition in which we see this is obviously pseudoexfoliation. But pars plana vitrectomy is seemingly running a close second and may exceed pseudoexfoliation as an etiology. And the problem in dealing with the post-vitrectomy eyes, of course, is no buoyancy. So if you should lose control of that lens or that lens bag complex when you're trying to reposition it, then it can fall to the back of the eye very rapidly. Now, depending upon where you work, what your training experience is, most of us in the United States, most who are anterior segment surgeons, are not trained to go back and fish lenses off the back of the eye. I think we should be, and if I were younger, I would spend the time to do it, because I think it's probably not necessary to involve two surgeons to do this. But this is the way we work here in the States, is that we do separate these forces, so to speak. So from a personal experience, also as I mentioned earlier, we tend to learn not by our successes, but by our failures. And in dropping a lens in a post-vitrectomy eye and then not having the ability to recapture, I said, I never want to have that happen to me again. So years ago, I developed what I call this tic-tac-toe board. You can see these 4 sutures underneath this lens, which I brought up in the anterior chamber. But that tic-tac-toe board I call a safety basket suture. And eventually my partner, Nicole Fram, and I published this in the Journal of Cataract and Refractive Surgery. And again, it's placed at the outset of surgery through the pars plana. It's not intended to stay inside the eye, but some people do use this in cases of retinal surgery where they bury the sutures under the conjunctiva. This is tied externally. I use a 10-0 polypropylene suture from Ethicon on an STC-6 needle. And actually, I do bend it much closer to the tip, about 3 millimeters from the tip and about 15 degrees. And the reason we bend it is that when we made it into a 27-gauge needle coming from the opposite side, we want to have good friction so that when we pull out the 27-gauge needle, we don't leave the suture needle inside the eye. That's another world of hurt. So we bend the needle so that we get firm fixation in the 27-gauge, and that comes from the opposite limbus. Once these are placed, then in eyes that are post-vitrectomy, almost invariably, you will need to have a chamber maintainer or a trocar system to keep the eye inflated, as we've mentioned in the past. And then once you have this network under the lens, you can then decide, do I want to suture it? Do I want to replace it? Now, I'm a major believer in less is more. If we take a look at this eye, this is a one-eyed patient, status post-vitrectomy, status post-buccal, with about 3 zonular fibers. So my intention was to salvage this lens so we wouldn't have to open the eye to remove it. You can see a lot of scarring of the conjunctiva, so taking down the conjunctiva would also be fraught with difficulty. So this is the 27-gauge needle that we bent near the hub, and then coming from the opposite limbus, about 2.5 or 3 millimeters back, is the bent STC-6 needle, which then goes into the 27-gauge. And this is done in the form of a horizontal mattress suture. They're about 3 to 4 millimeters apart, and again, 2.5 to 3 millimeters back from the limbus. And they meet behind the lens. You dock the STC-6 needle into the 27-gauge, and then if you've docked it well, then it comes out. And in a post-vitrectomy eye, I will do this in 2 meridia. So it will be horizontal and it will also be vertical. Now here's bending the needle about 15 degrees, 3 millimeters behind, 3 millimeters from the tip, and then dock it into the 27-gauge needle. And then once this is accomplished, we then have our decision whether we want to retain or remove the lens. Now, again, my desire was not to open this eye. We're going to mark carefully 180 degrees apart. In this case, an older case, we're going to place a chamber maintainer. And the Hoffman pocket was mentioned earlier. The nice thing about the Hoffman pocket is that you do not need to elevate the conjunctiva. It is a procedure of feel, though, and you want to be about half thickness. We want to use a very, very sharp crescent blade. This is the Mani blade from Japan. And we want to be able to see the blade through the conjunctiva so that we know that we're not too deep and we're not too superficial. Again, it takes experience and it's a procedure of feel. Once the pockets are created, we're then going to suture through it. This is a 25 gauge needle that goes through the pocket, underneath the iris, and on top of the bag. And from the opposite paracentesis, this is a Tenno polyester. Today I would clearly use Gore-Tex for this. This was done a number of years ago. And then a second needle is passed through the bag under the haptic, and then the double arm end of the Tenno polyester suture is again docked into this needle, and both needles are then brought out through the Hoffman pocket. And then we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. You watch the loop of that suture come, and when you pull on that loop of the suture, the lens better move or you've missed the haptic. It's a very important point. So we'll see that again here. The first pass is superficial to the bag lens complex, and then the second pass goes underneath it, completing a lasso around the haptic. So this is the second pass, goes through the bag haptic complex. You then reach into the pocket and bring out both ends of the suture. Now, the weakness of the Hoffman pocket is that it's difficult to titrate the tension. And so you start to tighten and then progressively tighten both sides. And once you're satisfied that you've got equal centration, you then tie the knots and cut them. And the knots will retract into the Hoffman pocket. And you then remove the OVD and remove the basket safety sutures. They're not designed to go in the post-operative period. And that, you know, that is a method that I use in post-vitrectomy eyes. Now, we can also apply it to the eye that's not had a vitrectomy, although I was concerned there might be some issue with vitreoretinal traction, but when you consider all the injections that the retinal people do for macular degeneration, the incidence of retinal detachment is close to zero. So, and this is a 7mm PMMA lens, and clearly we wouldn't want to remove it. So in cases where we have nearly 6 diopters of zonulisis, I will use this in a non-vitrectomy eye, but I'll place it in only one meridian. And this is, to me, this is kind of a bread and butter case where we have a lens in the bag. RP is one of those conditions that is associated with progressive zonulopathy. And so here I'm going to place a basket safety suture in just one meridian. It's not necessary to go 2. And we don't tie this too tight, just tight enough so that there's a little trampoline under the lens. Now, I prefer to take the conjunctiva down, and there are a variety of ways. This is the Gore-Tex suture that was mentioned earlier. The needle is flattened out. Then I'm going to dock it into a 27 gauge needle coming from the other side. But we can also do this in a variety of needleless ways. We can bury the suture in a 30 gauge needle and bring that into the eye. There are a host of methods. I start 3 millimeters back for the first pass, and then a millimeter anterior, millimeter and a half anterior to that for the second pass. So we now have a loop, a lasso of Gore-Tex suture. And again, when we pull it, we want to make sure the lens moves. So here again, the first pass is going to go underneath. We're going to turn that needle around. We're then going to dock it into a 27 gauge needle. And again, it's about 1.5 millimeters back from the limbus. First pass 3 millimeters, second 1.5 millimeters. And then when you pull on the suture, again, you should note that the IOL bag complex moves, indicating that you have lassoed it. And I do a 1-1-1 slip knot for these so we can progressively tighten the suture and observe our centration. And once I'm satisfied that it's well centered, I will then lock the suture. It's just a simple 1-1-1. And if you do this in this fashion, you can bury these knots. We'll take a little micro forcep and we'll bury the knot inside the scleral tunnel. These knots must be buried. I don't believe this little suture pass needs to be buried, but some people prefer to make a groove for it. I don't find it necessary. And then you have to close the conjunct. Here I'm placing hydrogel on the suture pass just to prevent hypotony postoperatively, and I'll use some fibrin adhesive here to close the conjunctiva, but that's an expensive way, but it makes it sutureless and secure. We'll take a look at one final example. Now, this is a patient who has multifocal IOLs and pseudoexfoliation. And at his original surgery, he requested multifocal IOLs. In the presence of pseudoexfoliation and a patient who requires either a toric or some type of a premium or presbyopic IOL, centration is obviously key. And so I place a capsule tension ring, not because it will help me at the initial surgery, but should that lens become loose in the late postoperative period, it's much better to suture the CTR than it is the haptics, so that you can really titrate the tension and get more than 2-point fixation and wind up with a perfectly centered IOL. So here again, about 5 clock hours or 6 clock hours of zonulopathy. And instead of marking 180 degrees apart, I'm going to mark 120 degrees apart. And that will give me 3-point fixation. And again, as I mentioned, these are lenses I want to keep in the eye. I don't want to open the eye unless I have to. And these are lenses that functioned well at the outset. I'm going to place a modified form of the basket suture because I'm going to be suturing the IOL in 3 meridia. So here I'm just going to put in one meridian, I'll place the basket safety suture, but I'll make an X out of it rather than just make a simple horizontal mattress. But that's just a matter of taste. So that's tied, and again, just a safety basket suture. And then I'm going to use the same method I showed you before, 3 and 1.5 back. Again, in this case, however, we're not going to suture the haptic. We're going to suture just the CTR. So the needle, this is 10-0 polyester, goes under the CTR, but over the haptic. It then gets docked into a 27 gauge needle coming through an opposing paracentesis. And then we'll turn that needle around and we'll come again here, 1.5 millimeters back. And we will then go superficial to the bag, again creating a lasso. And the nice thing about doing it in this fashion, because the sutures are radially oriented, there's no likelihood of torquing or tilting the IOL. So it's automatically an anti-torque concept. We pull it and make sure the lens moves. And we do this in 3 meridia. We'll only show you one more suture pass here. And then after you remove the OVD and you bring the pupil down with the myotic, you use the same concept of slip knots to tie these in progressive fashion to achieve excellent centration, which is really what's required in a multifocal and or multifocal toric IOL. So here the OVD is being removed, and you'll see in the video, and I'll show you in a slide, how well we can center the multifocal lens. And that's why it's so nice to have the CTR. So I will place a CTR, recommend it, in people with pseudoexfoliation in any type of a premium lens, even if they don't have zonulopathy. The knots are buried, and then I always use fluorescent dye to make sure that we have watertight seal. And here at close of surgery, you got a nice view of how well centered the IOL is. And if we take a look here, you can see, perhaps you can see the rings in the undilated, dilated view. And again, the radial suture pass is noted here. And we can do this with Gore-Tex, 9-0 Proline. Unfortunately, 10-0 polyester is no longer available to us here in the States. So that's the basket safety suture and where and how to use it.
Very good. Congratulations. Let me unmute. Okay, so I'm a big fan of this technique. The question is, how was it born? Can you tell us when you had the idea? I'm really curious about it.
Well, you have to realize I'm old, okay? So, so I am familiar with something that nobody else here. Raise your hand. If anybody knows about the Calhoun needles, you can barely find a reference to it. But that was a two-prong, like Neptune. It was a device that was used, I think, back in the 50s for patients who had anteriorly dislocated crystalline lens. They would turn the patient on their face with the lens now sitting against the cornea. They would take these two prongs and push it across the pars plana behind the IOL, the dislocated cataract, turn the patient on their back, open the eye, and then the lens was sitting right there. So immediately when I dropped this first lens in a post-vitrectomy eye, it reminded me of the Calhoun needle. So I started to look online. It's a very obscure publication. It wasn't even a peer-reviewed thing, but somehow somebody made me aware of this when I was in training back in the early 70s. So I envisioned it, and that's where that was born from.
Really nice. Neto, any comment?
Well, I think it's the idea of the safety basket in these cases where vitrectomy was done previously is very appealing, because we're, as anterior segment surgeons, we were scared to death to drop an IOL to the back of the eye. So it's a really outstanding idea.
Thank you.
Dr. Samad, please.
Yes, Mohamed, go ahead.
You use the safety sutures also in non-vitrectomatized eye also, or just in vitrectomatized eye?
Well, I showed you the first case was a vitrectomized eye. The second two cases were not vitrectomized eyes, but if they have about 6 clock hours of zonulisis, I will use it. Other than that, you really don't need it.
My inquiry about the vitreous, if you're passing this suturing in the presence of the vitreous going up and down and in and out, if there is any issue about vitreous manipulation in this situation in vitrectomatized eye?
It was a concern of mine, which is why I initially limited it just to the post-vitrectomy eye. But then it came, to my mind how many times the retina people are injecting and putting a needle into the vitreous to deliver the anti-VEGF drugs. And given that their incidence of retinal detachment is extremely low with doing the pars plana needles, that I thought putting this very, very fine needle would not be a problem. We have not seen as of yet a detachment in doing this. I honestly don't know whether the risk is real or imagined. But if the VR people were not doing so many pars plana injections, I wouldn't feel as safe. But since they do, I'm feeling safe doing that.
Lukan, you wanted to say something?
Actually, I agree with Sam, because passing 10-0 proline and not leaving in there probably would not cause any major damage to the already liquefied vitreous, because all of the eyes that he showed, one of the problem is the liquefaction of the vitreous. So I think Sam is on the safe side with this.
There is a live question about how many lenses have dropped over the years with proline sutures. I'm assuming that they meant 10-0 proline sewn to the sclera. It's true, I don't think that I would recommend ever to use 10-0 proline with suturing to the sclera. That said, it's controversial. Some people feel the only reason that occurs is friction of the proline suture through the eyelet of an IOL that has eyelets on the haptics. And you can definitely see in SEMs, you can definitely see that that occurs. There's also some hydrolysis that takes place. So I never recommend suturing IOLs to the sclera with 10-0 polypropylene. 9-0 will also degrade, but over much, much longer period of time. So the suture material of choice, or the drug of choice, as we say today, is really the Gore-Tex material, but it's not available to everybody, but I think that's probably the best material to use today.
Very good, very good. I'm going to discuss it further because I have made an adaptation of your technique, so I want to discuss this further. Francesco, any comments?
I just would stress what Dr. Masket said, that I agree. I mean, I think that proline nowadays shouldn't be used, 10-0 proline, which is available in Italy at least, shouldn't be used now. And I find it extremely difficult to maneuver also. I mean, the needles are far away. I mean, the proline is very long and it's very difficult to keep the orientation. I much rather use the Gore-Tex, which is more visible and more maneuverable in a way.
Very good, thank you. So, my brother and co-organizer, Lukan Mishev, please go ahead.
So this is, oh no, just a second, this is not, wait a second. So this is my case, just a moment. Now, this is an elder patient, like mid-80s, with subluxated lens back complex. And I decided to lengthen this complex to the fundus, because here you can see how the vitreous was attached. So if I pull somehow this lens complex, probably I can create a peripheral break. Now the next thing is to clear the vitreous. I like to clear the periphery when I'm going to suture a lens. And I like to clean around the trocars also, because often we get incarceration there, which can cause additional problems later. I like to use PFCL in order to keep safe the macular region, because when we try to reach the lens back complex, it often fails. So now I will try to clean this sort of donut from cortical materials, because if my original strategy here is to keep the lens in the eye and to suture it to the iris. If the lens is good enough to be used, I will do that. So in order to inspect that, I need to free the lens from all that capsular and cortical material there. Of course, during that process, some of the remnants will fall down to the fundus, and I will deal with that later. Now, it is fairly easy with 23 gauge cutter to remove all that material which was there for the last 10 or 20 years probably. I like to use a crocodile forceps, and I like to use the toggling the switch, the pedal between vacuum and cutter on and off in order to help and to engage the lens. Now we can see that during the original implantation probably this haptic suffered some rough manipulations, but still it seems good enough to be sutured to the iris. Now I will remove the rest of the cortical material and the capsule, and when that lens is clean, I don't see any issue, especially in elder patients, to be sutured to the iris. Why? Because as Dr. Boscia pointed before, the endothelium is something that we need to think about it, and one explantation procedure could damage the endothelium in such elder patients. Now I will use micro grasper from the anterior chamber to reach and get the lens. This is the importance to have all the tooling needed when you approach such complicated cases. And the beauty of the three-piece lens, as pointed by Neto as a Swiss Army knife, is that you can sit it like that on the iris, take your breath and prepare your strategy. Here I'm using 14 millimeters needle with 9-ohm prolane. I pass through the haptics and through the iris, and then I go directly through the cornea. Now the lens, someone can note that is in reverse side, but this is a MA60 lens, which is spherical one, and it doesn't matter what surface is facing the optical part of the eye. So now I will use Sipser sliding knot in order to fix the lens to the iris, and I find this technique is a lifesaver, especially in situations when I need to suture a lens, or I need to repair a damaged iris, or even if I need to make an iris circlage. Now the other part, the important thing to note is to use a spatula to guard your entering through the cornea, because there is no worse thing that cold fiber from the cornea, and you need to redo all the maneuvers. Now again, going out through the cornea, actually there is no issue with that pinching of the cornea, or at least I didn't saw up to now. Now I use this hook to retrieve the suture, which is really easy. Again, Sipser sliding knot. I like to make at least 4 such sliding knots in order to have a secure suture of the prolene haptic. I like to shake the lens to see if it is engaged or not, because sometimes we make the suture but the lens is not engaged. Micro scissor is also helpful, of course. And now I will use the vitractor to gently tuck the lens behind the iris. Of course, we can have a small ovalization or cut pupil with this technique, but judging the age of the patient and all the condition of this eye, probably it's negligible. Now, I like to do peripheral iridectomy with vitrector in this case, and then I will clean the rest of the cortical material. I will remove the PFCL from the posterior pole, and this is the eye after this surgery. Thank you.
Very good, Lukan. Very, very good. Thank you. So, any comments from the other panelists, please? Professor Masket and Boscia, who wants? Go ahead.
Yeah, as you may know, I was part of the original article on this and using it for secondary implantation. So I've had a lot of experience with iris suture fixation. And actually, we have reduced the indications for it. I no longer do it in an eye that doesn't have some degree of capsule support. We found there's too much irido-pseudophacodenesis in the post-vitrectomy eye. Greater likelihood for CME. So we're not doing it in a post-vitrectomy eye anymore, although given age of the patient, given circumstances, you don't have to reopen the eye, and it's really, really nice to have that and all of these tricks, in our armamentarium. So knowing how to suture, to reposition a lens with iris suture fixation is a time-honored and really a wonderful tool. But we're not doing it in the post-vitrectomy eye any longer. With respect to pupil ovalization, you can fix that also. At the very end of the suture, surgery, if you just take a little micro forceps and just grab the iris near the suture and pull it centrad, you'll free up some of those fibers that have been trapped. So we don't need to have an ovalized pupil any longer. But that's really your ability to work in the front and the back of the eye is just brilliant. And just one other comment. The Summerings ring that you had was soft material. When they're rock hard, that's misery even for the posterior segment surgeon. So if possible, I would prefer to bring that up in the anterior segment and remove the whole thing rather than have it sit in the back. But the soft ones, it's not a problem at all.
Francesco?
Dr. Masket, is that, are you a vitreoretinal surgeon? Because this is absolutely what I do. Because sometimes you find this hard rock summer ring, it's really a nightmare. Also because it's a sausage-shaped, falls down, breaks in pieces. So what I do is actually remove it via an anterior approach. And
yeah, those fibrotic calcific ones, yes.
Yes, it's a calcific, and it's very difficult. So owing to the enlargement of the section I'm doing, because I need to remove the summer ring, in those cases, I implant an artisan IOL, an iris claw lens. As you said, we have to have all this technique in our armamentarium because we can gauge the IOL choice and fixation according to the need of the patient.
Excellent. Mohamed, Tawfik, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. In your case, Dr. Lukan, and you have a 3-piece IOL, you are cleaning it. What's your choice to using it by a Yamane technique or using it by iris suturing? What's your clue that you decided that this case for iris fixations, or I can do it for Yamane? Why are you doing iris fixation and you can go for Yamane? You are already vitrectomy.
Yeah. I anticipated such question. Actually, I used Yamane technique and I use it with AR40 and MA60 lens because they are available here. And yes. I had issues with the bent, broken haptics and even haptics disengaged from the optics, late disengagements. And when I saw that in the Summering ring inside, one of the haptic is already damaged it's obvious that if I try to do Yamane, I can probably bend it or break it a little bit more. With that said, after I tried Carlevale this week, I think that I will avoid iris fixation, especially in younger patients, and I will go to Carlevale because it's really straightforward, really physiological, and I don't see why I should suture iris or even sclera. I had abundant scleral suturing long time ago because the rate of the retinal detachment after that is not low. I mean scleral suturing with sutures, not tunnels, handshake, etc. So that is my opinion here.
May I comment?
Of course.
Yeah. I think that I am very much concerned about the corneal endothelium. And I think that we better remove an IOL in a straightforward and simple way and implant a new one better than trying to suture and fixate, because in those cases we need to exchange instruments, utilizing and shaking maneuvers and lot of fluids within the eye. At the end of the day, the endothelial damage might be much worse with all these attempts than just exchanging the IOL.
Neto, please.
Lukan, one of the most difficult things in iris fixation techniques is to judge how tight the iris suture should be tied in order to allow some adjustment and also prevent wire teasing the iris tissue. Do you have any tips on it?
It's more or less personal feeling about the tension. I cannot recommend some tips or tricks. You need to use to that, because I agree, if you over tension the suture over the iris, you can cause local ischemia or additional issues. So it's like a personal feeling.
Excellent. Dr. Bill Myers from USA has a question. If anyone in Europe is using the Zeiss CT Lucia 202 for the Yamane technique.
We don't have it in Bulgaria. It's registered in Romania. So purely from a logistical point of view, it's not easy to access the lens, because this is a PVDF haptics lens.
Yeah.
I agree, this is the best way to approach Yamane, but we'll
talk about it later, don't worry. And the last question from Moon Wai Lee in YouTube. The Summering's ring is a pain to remove. Any tips to do it safely, or in those where it's anterior to stop it dropping from the back?
I think already Dr. Boscia pointed the way that it should be done. The only reason I floated the lens back to the fundus was to remove the traction from the vitreous. If it was hard, I probably would lift it up in the AC and then deal with the hard shimmering ring.
Okay, guys, very good. Dr. Ketan Jathar in YouTube, last question. With Yamane fixation available now, would you still consider this technique?
For me,
that's for you, Lukan.
Probably in elder patients where I should avoid endothelial damage and the life expectancy is more or less 10 years, I can go again with iris suturing. In younger patients, I will go with Carlevale. Yamane, for me, is, at least with polypropylene haptics, is a dead end. Only with PVDF, but I don't have access to them. So Carlevale will be my choice.
Okay, and another thing which I would like to remember before we go forward. 2 weeks ago, I think we had a webinar with Ahmed where we were discussing secondary implantation, and what we were talking is you should know that 2 or 3 will be enough, because it also depends on your mood, the situation, for which technique you're going to use. Depends a lot. Okay, guys, let's go ahead. So that's my time. Let me just prepare here to share the screen. Okay, here, zoom. 1 second. Let me see why it's like this. Okay, here, and share screen. Share computer sound and PowerPoint. Can you see it, my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So guys, before starting, I would like to honor my Professor Flavio Rezende Diaz. He was the Chief of Ophthalmology in Rio, where I did my residency. He was one of the pioneers in cataract surgery here in Brazil. He was my father's professor, my professor, and my brother's professor. And he passed away. He was in his mid-80s, a beautiful gentleman. I never see this guy nervous, and he was a wonderful surgeon. He helped hundreds of ophthalmologists to become who they are today. So I would like to honor him today, okay? Let's go ahead. So I'll talk today about the Yamane Masket hybrid technique, the half basket technique for tilted IOLs, okay? I am in Santa Maria, southern Brazil, so I don't want to lose too much time here about how to plan it, because Neto did it wonderfully with much more didactics than I can do. But you have just to remember, if it is a complication, it was a trauma, you are needing to exchange the IOL, the capsular support, if you have it or not, you're gonna do it in anterior or posterior chamber. Nowadays, we don't have much more cases where we are putting anterior. We are going to make the fixation, if you're going to suture it, and what kind of IOL you're going to use. Most of my experience is just with 3 pieces and 1 piece, but I don't have artisan in the public system here in Brazil, just in the private system. Don't have to talk much about the Yamane technique, which is the suture-less intrascleral implantation. We have already discussed the risks. There is a few cases with haptic extrusion, some bleed, intraocular bleed, macular edema, vitreoretinal tractions. Professor Masket discussed it a lot, okay? Many people asked about endophthalmitis, at least in my situation. I never had one. But yes, one of the things that we are having sometimes is tilted IOL, because when the first time when the technique was presented, it was using polypropylene haptics, and they do bend. Everybody know they do. Now we have, as Dr. Bill Myers just mentioned, the Lucia, which is PVDF, polyvinyl, but in Brazil, we don't have access to that. The second technique, we have just seen it from the author, which is the basket, or people are also calling it the net or hashtag because of internet nowadays. Here we have the technique, the paper. I won't discuss that because I don't want to embarrass myself, okay, after Dr. Masket. And this is not from the case, but when we have a problem, like in this UBM, where you have an IOL, which is really tilted, we have 2 options to do it. To change it, okay, or to bring it down or up. To bring it down, we have to tie an elephant in it. And doing that inside an eye, it would be a little bit complicated. So, what is the proposal here? We have to pass a basket suture in order to lift this IOL to try to put it back to its position, okay? So, we are going to take it up. Here I'm going to present you, the hybrid technique. So let me just take the sound off. We are doing a vitrectomy. It's a little bit dark because it's an old surgery recorded with an iPhone. I have the IOL on the back, okay? You're gonna see we lift it, we bring it up. In the public system, I don't have foldable 3 pieces IOL, so I'm obliged to open it 5 millimeters. I take the IOL out. Now, I measure the distances, usually 2.5 millimeters from the limbus. I pass a 25 gauge needle. I prefer using them because it's easier to dock. I've tested it before, as we mentioned. So gently we pass it. I bring it through the sclera. Here was one of my first Yamanes. I did a mistake. I didn't make it hot enough, so the flange isn't well done. I go to the other side. I use a crocodile forceps. I pass it again. Gently, always gently take care of the endothelium. I pass it. In Brazil, we call this birdie. It has a cupper. It's a cupper in the tip of it. Then we have the flange. But on the other side, the flange escape it. So again, I go there, I cut the tip, and I'll try to pass it again on the same place. It's virtually impossible, but we try to do it. Now I have docked it properly. I do it more gently. And the thing is, I have manipulated the Prolene haptic so much that now the IOL is bent. I didn't want to do everything again, so I remember I could use the basket technique from our friend who's presenting with us today in order to try to lift the IOL and try to have a better position for it. You're gonna see now that after I have passed it twice, that before suturing it, here I'm measuring again. I like to measure many times to avoid mistakes because you don't want to repeat or reoperate the patient. You're gonna see that according the way which I'm gonna finish the suture, that the reflex of the IOL will be changing. That means, look at there. I'm changing the position of the IOL, okay? So I don't have a good depth of field here, but more or less I think it's a good position. I finish, I suture it, and I'm not gonna waste your time seeing the rest. On the same day, and that's why I asked Professor Masket how he had the idea, because on the same day, when I'm between one surgery and another, I receive a cell phone message through WhatsApp from my clinician, and he sends this. Do you remember one of the Yamanes you have done? This is his refraction. The guy wants to kill everyone down here. What can we do? And when I see the refraction, for God's sake, what have I done? My first consideration is that because we have to use their 5 millimeters incisions, that the cornea was totally wrong. So I asked him for a keratometry, and this is it. There is a small difference, just one diopter from one other eye. So sadly, I don't have the video, but I just used the technique. So I called the guy, I passed the half basket again. He has a nylon suture, which I doesn't touch it because one diopter of astigmatism, it's okay. I don't want to mess to it. And here you can have a better schematic disease. And this week, before coming to this presentation, I went to my electronic chart to see his refraction. And then there is a small type from my clinician, and probably this is one of the luckiest moments in my career. The guy is -2 after 2 months, and he's extremely happy now because he can read without glasses. So probably I won't ever be able to repeat something that in my life. And I start using it a lot because I have a good access to Prolene. In the public system as well, we don't have access for Gore-Tex, which would be perfect, but later I want to ask to the other panelists, because Prolene is not a problem in the vision, but when we are going to use in the visual axis, Gore-Tex, aren't we going to have this problem? I want to listen from you later. This is another case, okay, where the patient had a posterior capsule rupture, dropped IOL, I do the vitrectomy, I bring it up. It's a single piece, and you can see on the right side, the green is the capsular support which I had. So the blue are the haptics. I put them there, and I see that the IOL is bending a little bit. It's not very stable, so I decided again to use the half basket, okay? In order that I would cover the back of it, and the rest I would create a new support for this IOL. And the patient is really happy. So this is a picture from last week. This patient has a good vision, it's recovering, and she's not complaining. About we have talked before, PMMA haptics. This study from Hiroshima University in Japan shows they have tested the flexibility from the haptics. It's not considered PP more or less, and it's what most of the people have nowadays. And PVDF would be the perfect choice, but not everybody has access to it, like Lukan Mishev told. just in Romania, it's a lot. So the take-home message for you here. I like to do prior PPV, but we have discussed it. I'm a retinal surgeon. It's not available for everyone. Another thing that I didn't told you before, I use Prolene 10 zeros. I don't dissect the conjunctiva. Please discuss that with me later, because after 10 days, I've seen that the erosion that the Prolene causes in the conjunctiva will cover the Prolene, okay? One thing very important, usually I do vitrectomy, so there is much less risks of having endophthalmitis. By accident, I discovered a technique for correction of the tilting of the IOL, and we can also control the ELP. It's a good way to avoid reoperation, simpler, but one thing we need more studies to know the position. Maybe we are finding a cheap and safer, a cheaper way to correct refractive errors from tilted Yamanes, okay? And that's it, my good friends. Thank you for your attention. And let's stop sharing this screen. Thank you. Professor Masket, please, I want to listen from you.
Okay, well, I think that's a brilliant concept. The things that come to mind, I assume you're burying the knot so so that even though you've got externalized Prolene, eventually the conjunctiva epithelializes over it, and so you're not worried about having a path of entry for microbes into the eye. If I were to do that, I probably would still open the conjunctiva for safety reasons. I might even choose ninopolypropylene so that we wouldn't worry about this suture breaking over the years. You know, I share your experience in our practice. My partner, Nicole Fram, has had a lot of experience with Yamane. And there are no question there are tilts. We've had them referred from all parts of the country. It would be very, very nice if when we all have intraoperative OCT and we could see exactly how these lenses are sitting. And then as Yamane has showed, you can bring these haptics out and you can adjust them and adjust their length to reduce the tilt and the decentration. So titrating the Yamane has now become, you know, the state of the art rather than just cook it and tuck it, so to speak. How long, I don't know how long this would last, because if there's some friction of the IOL against the tenopolypropylene, which is why I might think about doing it with Nino. But I think it's really brilliant rather than redoing the entire lens. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And just to answer you, yes, I wanted 9.0, but I didn't have access to that. That's a pity. But for sure, I know that in between 5 or 10 years, they are coming back that suddenly the vision got worse. So far, I hope we have access to Vortex or something better. And that's it. Thank you. Lukan or Mohamed, please.
First, we heard from Dr. Samuel about this past suture for safety. Now you told us about the verification of tilting. So we need to learn what is about the adjustment of tightening of the suture.
Okay, very good. Thanks for the question.
It told us about the verification, not just for safety. You know,
could I make a comment on that? Now, again, you need availability. But I know that Yamane has been using intraoperative aberrometry, the aura, to titrate his spherical error. He brings the lens up if he needs to induce a little myopia, and he moves the lens further down, and then he'll do the flange. He's been using intraoperative aberrometry. You could do the same thing in order to determine both the spherical as well as the cylinder component of your refraction. So you can tighten it as you need to change more and more the cylinder.
But I know you want to talk about, look, and just one question, just to answer to Mohamed. The thing is, yes, I buried the knots, okay, because I use a 25, so the hole is a little bit bigger, so I can rotate the suture and the knot is inside. Answering to you, Mohamed, the question is how much I tight, you want to know, right? The thing is, there is a natural limit. I want to press, when I see that I'm pressing the eye too much, I leave it a little bit because, you know, there is a limit for this technique, okay? I cannot tight it too much, or the patient will have permanent pain. So as Lukan said before, when you are doing an iris fixation, you have to find the right point to do it. Lukan, please.
I want to comment about Yamane, and the thing that the point is not only to tuck the lens, but to fix it in the right position. The mandatory thing is the angle on which the preliminary needle path is entering the sclera, because this will determine how the lens will sit, or the lens will be twisted even. Yes. So if it's already not sitting like it's supposed to be, so definitely the angle of the original incision is wrong. The only way to fix that without removing the lens from there is actually the basket technique. And with the basket technique, there are two things to note. If you want to create a myopic shift, obviously you will enter the limbus more anteriorly to lift the lens, or vice versa. If you want to create a hyperopic shift, you will go more posteriorly. Okay, but still to control that, you need either ORA or intraoperative OCT. So probably Yamane will evolve as state-of-the-art refractive procedure, but here is the moment that I should mention a goiter device for Yamane fixation. There is like a ring with a pre-measured path for the needles, so probably it should be used in Yamane technique.
Very good, Lukan. Another question we have here: how apart do you space the Prolene sutures for the basket technique? We have the author here. Later, I'll give my opinion.
I'm just, and again, I'm not compulsive about measuring the separation. They're about 3 to 4 millimeters apart, somewhere in that general, and about 2.5 millimeters posterior to the limbus. But again, as Lukan said, we would, if we're going to do it to adjust for the IOL, then we would either move it up or back based upon the spherical component of the refraction.
Exactly, and like Lukan said, when PVDF haptics become the pattern, I think we'll have much less refractive errors as well. Because even if you haven't done it right, the PP haptics, they work with time, they change a little bit. So sometimes you have done it properly, and a few months later, the guy comes with the patient comes with a refractive error.
I have a question to Francesco about the Carlevale. I heard that it is produced already in hydrophobic version. This is the question 1. Is it true? And the question 2 is about the visibility of the anchor. I really like that in your presentation. If somehow the anchor can be painted with something or different color, probably will be more useful to see under sclera where it is.
Well, both the information you have are correct. I mean, they are trying the hydrophobic, they are producing in hydrophobic, and they are studying the painting of the plugs. Yes. Mm-hmm. So you have the good information, or good ideas, I don't know.
Information.
Yes, I think, well, to comment, I was, of course, I was listening and learning from you, and of course, I understand that all this gauging of pulling and pushing is difficult. It's still an artist's work, but still, in my mind, I think that having something simple and reproducible is the best way to deal with something that I think that Gustavo mentioned the patient feeling about it. I mean, these are patients who already are stressed, already underwent several surgical procedures, and we want them to be happy for good. And in my mind, the only way to have them at home happy is to implant something which is reproducible. And now the evidence is there with the refractive correction of the Carlevale is very, very reproducible. And still, I think that having it of course, having it available would be the best way to deal with this problem.
Another question to Francesco again about the Carlevale. Have you done Suture exchange with Carlevale? Because I heard that it's sort of bulging out of the iris, or not?
Okay, this is another good question, of course. In my mind, talking about reoperations of this patient, I feel much safer with something which is much more stable because, again, apart from the plugs, which are two, of course, and are punctual, there is also all the optic area which sits in the insidiary sulcus, which gives stability to this IOL. I routinely carry out a partial fluid air exchange, but I would feel much safer in reoperating a patient with this IOL better than other, say, sutured or transcleral IOL with only 2 points of fixation.
Yeah. Thank you. Perfect.
So it doesn't bulge. When I do the fluid air, of course, it's a partial fluid air, it's a non-expansile gas, but I never had any such experience.
Yeah, but...
And again, in most of these cases, I do carry out an iridotomy. I think that I would feel on the safe side, again, because I don't want any complaint from any stressed patient.
I'm thinking if I'm going to do a secondary case with the fluid air exchange, I will just constrict the pupil and make the iridotomy and everything will be fine.
I don't know, if we are talking about Carlevale, of course. Because,
yes, Carlevale, yes.
The question. With other IOL is different, but this is 6.5 optics with a large optic area. I mean, it's virtually impossible to have any tilting. Yes, you might calculate perhaps some tilting, but it's very minimal.
Thank you.
Neto.
Well, I think this meeting just showed us that we need to get proficient in various IOL fixation techniques as individual indication varies. And also we need to keep up with new options, such as the Carlevale IOL. Boy, I would love to have the opportunity to use it. I think it's an outstanding idea and design.
Mohamed?
For me, like Dr. Neto said, we need to learn a large number of types of IOL suturing or IOL implantation, because if you are restricting in one type of suturing or one type of implantation, you may stuck for in some operation to do another type. For me, I learned today Masket suture. I will search for Carlevale IOLs. This is why I learned it today. I learned it from all of you. Thanks for all this valuable information about IOL implantation.
Okay, Professor Masket, the last considerations from you, please.
I think the most wonderful thing is that ophthalmology is an international language. And I think it is just terrific that we can all share our thoughts, look at different techniques from around the world, and all understand what we're trying to accomplish to make life better for our patients. So I'm really pleased to be part of this and to share with some very, very innovative surgeons. So thank you.
Last thing, we need to thank COVID-19 to give us all this much more information while you are sit in your home and get a lot of information. Thanks to COVID-19 for this opportunity.
Oh yeah, it's a technological tsunami, and those who adapt to it will be like the dinosaurs that didn't adapt to the big meteor. Will be waved from the surface of the planet. Yeah. Guys, thank you all so much. Thank you, Lukan, for organizing. Thank you for accepting. For those attendees, I think we were in more than 50 countries today. It was really, really good being with you and learning with you. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon at meetings very soon.
And stay safe and healthy.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.